But first, should people be fined £100 for refusing to wear a mask in shops? The government made that policy official today. It's going to come in 2 weeks. You are not happy about it. Just 38% of people saying that we should be fined. 62% of people saying we shouldn't be. 0344 499 1000 if you want to weigh in. But first, someone with a very strong view on this is Peter Hitchens, the Mail on Sunday columnist. Peter, you just think the nation has been muzzled.
Well, I think that it's very curious that we now live in a country where not merely can you be, if your spouse is dying, forbidden to go anywhere near them, you can be told you can't leave your home, you can be told whether or not you can go to a stretch of moorland, you can be chased around by the police for sunbathing. There was no limit of the extra powers which we've granted to government to mess around with us. And now it proposes to tell us what we should wear. Now, anybody would understand that the covering of private parts should be an obligation, and the law is reasonably concerned in that. But most of us aren't tempted to, apart from that man who used to ramble the country in nothing but a pair of boots.
But maybe what comes out of our mouths is more dangerous now, though, Peter.
I don't think any of us ever thought until very recently that we would be ordered by the government to wear any garment, let alone one which covers the face.
Yeah.
And what has struck me very strongly is how many people are prepared not merely to accept this, but who, when I protest against it as an imposition, rail at me for effectively being guilty of murder because as a result of my refusal to wear such a thing, allegedly people will drop dead in their thousands. I think, like so much of the government response to the COVID problem, it's wholly out of proportion. Not justified by practical science. Only a few days ago, the government itself, in a series of documents issued to traders, people reopening shops, hairdressers and so forth, said that the evidence for the effectiveness of masks in protecting others was weak, and the results of doing so likely to be small. That was the government's own wording. And they themselves put it in many documents less than 3 weeks ago. Now they're proposing to fine people for not doing something which they think is probably not worth doing. So what is going on here seems to be much more about politics.
Well, of course, and it is very complicated for the public, isn't it, given that Jonathan Van Tam, England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, said on April the 3rd at one of those Downing Street briefings, there is no evidence that general wearing of the face masks by the public who are well affects the spread of the diseases. I guess the thing that I find sad, though, Peter, is that by making this compulsory, in some ways you remove the altruistic aspect of this, don't you? Which is that, look, I don't love wearing a mask. I don't love it. But if I'm in a taxi with someone who, like a driver who is wearing one, then I'll put mine on, because you're sort of showing mutual respect for one another. Making it compulsory takes that away, doesn't it? And it sort of throws this debate onto the fire of the culture war.
Well, that's also true. It's not my major concern. If people want to wear these things, that's their business. I'm not going around berating people for wearing muzzles or pulling them off. What I'm surprised much more by is the number of people who are prepared to shout at me and say, you must wear a muzzle, put it on, stop whinging, that I get all the time. And what is for certain is if anybody resists this edict, they will very quickly be surrounded by people in Tesco's or wherever it is shouting at them, get your mask or get out. So
what will you do now? What are you going to do now?
Well, my view of this is I've never said I won't wear a face covering, because it's plain that such a boast can't conceivably be maintained in real life. I have two responses. One, that if I'm absolutely compelled to do it, then I will wear my heavy-duty Warsaw Pact gas mask, pictures of which are available on Twitter. So
I've seen them. I've seen them.
And if that's what you want, that's what you'll get. But I should also point out to people that certainly in the case of the public transport requirement for wearing muzzles, which has actually been done more or less according to law, not an act of parliament, but a statutory instrument, there are quite strict rules, and they do specifically grant exemptions. And I would urge anybody who's worried about this to look carefully at those exemptions.
Yes, but even if you have an exemption, though,
they apply to them to assert them when challenged.
I know the problem is, though, even if you have an exemption, you're still going to be treated like a pariah, aren't you? That's the issue.
It may take some courage, but I think if people simply say, look, and there are most certainly people around who are very distressed by having to wear such things, either physically or mentally. And I think the people who are preparing to go around berating their fellow citizens for not wearing muzzles should be very careful before doing so, that they're not actually attacking somebody who has a very good reason for not wearing it. And I would very much advise caution on anybody who's proposing to be a sort of Stasi informer or shouter at non-muzzle wearers under these circumstances. But the real problem remains: why are we doing this? What is it all about? If you look at the chart of deaths from the coronavirus on the day that people died, which is the proper accurate one compiled by the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine in Oxford, the number of deaths from coronavirus has been falling since April the 8th, and is now extremely low. What is the point? Why is it so urgent now that we should all be muzzled as the deaths are reaching their lowest level? And if it is so urgent, why are they waiting till the 24th of July to impose it? Why isn't it instant? It's a political act. It's not it's not.
Well, yes, and it's driven by polling, isn't it? Because polling shows that this is a very popular move. About 2/3 of the country are in favour of it. But I just worry where it ends, because when do you stop making the wearing of masks compulsory? And what happens, Peter, when nightclubs, for example, are allowed to reopen and concerts are allowed to be held? Are we still going to be in a ridiculous place where, even though there are mass gatherings to some degree, we're still wearing masks? That's my issue. Where does this end?
Or perhaps the Warsaw Pact gas mask will become the fashion item, and I will finally be ahead of fashion. But I imagine that nightclub full of people in gas masks doesn't appeal to me, but there are some people who might. No, it's undoubtedly complicated, and also what research there is does tend to suggest that if there is transmission between people, it happens when they spend more time with each other, which of course they do much more in pubs, where these masks are not required, than they do in supermarkets, where they are. It's illogical on its own terms, as well as all kinds of other terms as well. I think it's very significant that what it involves is the covering of the mouth. I think people going around with the lower halves of their face covered look submissive, defeated, surrendered, mouthless, voiceless. And I think that there's something about this which spreads the idea that we're in a state of severe national danger in which we all have to turn to the government. This government has, over many, many months now, distilled power and authority out of fear. And I think it sees rapidly approaching a time when the economic crisis really begins to bite, when its power and authority are going to be very limited unless it can get them from somewhere. And I suspect that maintaining the fear of COVID-19 is one way in which they see they may do this. It doesn't, let's say, make sense on the science. It doesn't make sense on the facts. And here's another absolutely fascinating fact. A few weeks ago, if you looked for papers, policy papers, research papers saying whether masks were a good idea, there were several announcements and papers, some of which have disappeared from their positions on the net, which were hostile to muzzles.
Yes.
And there was a statement by the World Health Organization, which was definitely against the wearing of muzzles. Now, a few weeks ago, the World Health Organization did a reverse ferret and changed its mind. And Deborah Cohen of the medical correspondent Newsnight on the BBC has an amazing scoop the other day. She actually discovered, and she put it to the WHO, that her contacts inside the World Health Organization had told her that the position of the WHO on muzzles had been changed because of political pressure, not because of medical reasons.
Wow.
It seems to me this should have been on the front page of many newspapers and indeed have led BBC bulletins. You heard it here from me because the BBC hasn't given Deborah Cohen's fantastic story the projection it deserved.
Because it goes against the prevailing tide, which you have throughout this crisis, Peter, and you still are.
I have some company now. I had less company at the beginning, but I have more company now.
You definitely do. You definitely do.
Very much a minority.
Peter Hitchens, a columnist at The Mail on Sunday, who says that the nation has been muzzled today.